bothered because how can somebody be at France, in Germany, as well as in Austria, and they were committing this series of a lot of different crimes, ranging from body offenses as well as property offenses. So later it was revealed that the DNA, the process of collecting DNA was through cotton swabs, and the person who was in charge of manufacturing that cotton was actually sneezing into that cotton. So actually the person who sneezed into the cotton, her DNA was being recorded at all these three places. It was this one company from where cotton was being provided to all these countries in Europe. And so some story that I read today. It was for some 16 years that the law enforcement was really bothered about who is this lady criminal who's at this traveling to these three countries all over Europe and committing. And it was not her, it was the problematic cotton swab. Many critical things keep happening in criminology. All right, so again, there'll be no PPT. It will just be me speaking. And after we are done with this session, I'll share the notes that I've prepared for the lecture yesterday and today. So I'll share the PDF of that. You can use that for reference. So before I move on, I'll really like to thank Ms. Sheikh, really throwing some light on mental health disorders being, am I not again audible? The mental health disorders being a reason for crime. It's very lately, for example, the Supreme Court of India in 2016 and again in a judgment in 2019 came up with this thing called mitigation, where people who have been pronounced death penalty. So the Supreme Court says that mitigation should be applied, and another report of their mental well-being should really be submitted. And that has resulted in few cases where the crime was because of mental health disorders, but eventually the court pardoned them and reduced their sentences from death penalty to life imprisonment. There was lately another case where one person was tried thrice for death penalty, and in two cases he was pardoned, and in the third case he was supposed to serve life imprisonment, but again because of the mitigation report, he's out now. So there was this video story of his. I'll also post the link to his interview in the group after we are done. So it's really encouraging that the criminal justice system is really focusing on the causes of crime, apart from just being that punitive measure it always has been. So that brings me to today's lecture, which is theories of crime. We'll focus on the theories of how people have attempted to understand and theorize crime from ancient times. So our lecture will today be divided into the Dark Ages, Enlightenment era, classical era, neoclassical era, and what the modern theory says about crime. So it has always, the idea has always been about defining justice. Well, I personally have never understood the concept of justice, like not understood as in not understood the meaning, but what really is justice? Whom are we providing justice for? So let's begin the lecture. The very first thought of criminology, the very first theory of crime, recorded theory of crime, came from demonological school of thought. So this goes back to 13, 14, 11, 12, 13, 14th century, where crime was considered, for example, today crime is considered a psychosocial issue. It results out of unfortunate circumstances, mentally or the surroundings that he has been, results into crime. We have been able to scientifically prove that. But then 1,000 years ago, crime was a phenomenon which people said that crime happens because crime was considered a sin. If you For example, if we talk about Hinduism, people said that just because you committed a gross sin in your previous life, you're not supposed, you'll not retake your rebirth as a human. So most of the understanding of crime came from religious backgrounds. So that's what basically demonological school of thought is. So the ancient beliefs, demonological school of thought says that ancient beliefs, for example, there have been recorded instances where earlier people thought that lightning, the thing that is when rains, we've got lightning. So people thought that lightning happens because God is angry on us. So a lot of things which were unexplainable or which we couldn't fathom as human beings were termed as something that is unnatural, which is not in the reach of humans. So crime was also considered as something which was a result of committing a sin. So that's where we started documenting the theories of crime. For example, certain behaviors, people said that a few supernatural forces take over human being, and that actually forces people to act criminally. And there is a particular need to separate those people who are affected by these demonological things. They are supposed to be separated from the normal society, and they're supposed to be treated. But that's where all this idea of demonological school of thought came. And then, fortunately or unfortunately, religion played a very big role in uh, definition of crime, because it was religious people who used to have a hold in the society. The church and the state were not separated then, and most of the rules were actually defined on religious basis. So religion was the law then, and as I said, crime was considered emerging from sin. And there were a lot of moral perspectives in understanding crime then. Uh, so people used to say that a person who is morally corrupt is a criminal. And what was the solution to that? Was redemption. The more you pay penance to the Almighty, that's the only way out of getting out of crime. So how did the older generation identify criminals? They used to believe in supernatural signs. For example, people had unusual behaviors. They had unusual marks on their body. For example, a lot of things that we today identify as mental health issues were considered a taboo then. Well, it's even a taboo now. But then those were considered as unnatural traits that certain people had because of their behavior, and they were people who had sinned in some part of their life, and that had actually resulted in them being criminals. And how did they go about it? They were trial by ordeals. So what they used to do was they used to hang them, or they used to submerge them in water, or give harsher punishments. And they used to say that if God allows, and if they didn't commit a sin, if they were pure, crime was a moral, pure, impure thing back then. So if you are really not, if you're really pure in the sense of not committing a sin, then you would be saved by God. For example, if you're hanged, then you some supernatural force would come and save you. If you are being drowned in the water, and if you really didn't commit that sin, then some forces will actually save you from not being drowned. So that's how it might sound a bit unrealistic now, because most of the thoughts of criminologists now are rational, but then that was the reality then. So that's where the again there were a lot of witch hunting that used to happen. Women, if they had unruly behavior, were tagged as witches, and they used to be punishment then was very harsh. For example, those things are unfortunately in today's world also observed. For example, in certain tribal areas of eastern India, Bihar and Odisha, we still have people tagging women who are not who don't behave normally, are tagged as witches, and and they attack witches, and they're publicly flogged. So that's how things were for a longer period of time. And things started changing in the 18th century. So there were a lot of reforms happening, not only by separation of church and religion. There were a lot of new age thinkers that were coming up. So 18th century is usually called the age of enlightenment. A lot of revolutions happened during that time, and people, there were a lot of new age philosophers that came in who also had a say in why people commit crime. So that also had an effect on crime. And that is when in 18th century things started shifting towards classical thought, and this also had a role in defining crime. So in 18th century, the classical school of thought, which based its basic philosophy that humans had free will. So that is also one argument that religion also gives, that for example, if we argue with someone who's a theist, they might, for example, we shoot a question that where does God go when little children are punished, or when where does God go when, if God is all forgiving and omnipresent and all powerful, why doesn't he act when little children are punished, or when there's earthquake, or when people who didn't deserve a particular action are part of that action. So all these religious people give that argument that humans are born out of free will. So every human have been given an individual blueprint, and they have their own free will. So they act according to what they feel is right. So this, while that theory was developing, this was also borrowed by the uh, classical school of criminology, and this also became the basis of explanation of why people commit crime. So uh, Caesar Beccaria was one of the early social thinkers. He also was one of the first persons to also delve into sociology and tried explaining why people commit crime. And Cesar Beccaria, apart from being a sociologist, he also had, for example, most of the countries in the world follow a 5 year plan. They have their governments for 5 years, they have their policies for 5 years, and after every 5 years, for example, in India and most places, you have an election and you have another committee set up to decide whether those things which continued for 5 years should continue, or should we come up with something new. So that was also proposed by Cesar Beccaria. So that was in 1764. He was an 18th century social thinker. And what he said was crime should be understood as something which so he said that the whole idea of causality of crime should be measured on what happens to the society rather than what happens to the victim. So the harm that is caused to the society as a whole is what he tried explaining through his theory of crime. And so he said that people commit crime because of bad laws, economic stature, and poverty. And he said that only harsher punishments can reform people. And so that's where the retributive theory of crime came in, where he said that if you have to reform someone, you have to give him the same degree of punishment that equals the harm that he caused. For example, tooth for a tooth, eye for an eye, all of those ideas, although had a religious base, but were heavily propagated during the 18th century age of enlightenment. And he also, again, started basing his theory on the idea of severity versus certainty. So he said that the punishment should be certain more than severe. Again, what he meant was that if we really want to reform, rehabilitate someone, we should ensure that he is certainly punished than severely punished. Certainty versus severity. So for a good society, or for a society to move in a positive form, he said that the certainty of punishment should be ensured rather than severity. We should not think of like really punishing people, but then catching those criminals and subjecting them to punishment would actually lead to reformation. So that was his one of his uh, arguments towards the definition of crime. And then in early 19th century, Jeremy Bentham, again another social thinker, he came in and he said that, for example, he didn't actually agree with Cesar Beccaria. And what he said was, for example, the theory that Beccaria said, he didn't actually agree with it. And what he said was, for example, if there is a rapist and he rapes a woman, and to avoid that punishment, for example, according to Beccaria, there were a lot of laws that were developed, and people who were caught would be punished. So what Jeremy Bentham proposed was, for example, if a person commits a heinous offense such as rape, so if he knows that he'll be caught, so there's a tendency that he kills that woman so that he's not caught, and also he commits that crime. So his idea of certainty versus severity failed there. And the basics of what Jeremy Bentham came up with a theory was that he said that humans are calculative animals. And for example, a person commits crime, not only crime, any activity that a human does comes out of a calculative thought. It also is borrowed from the hedonistic principles, where if a person wants to commit any activity, in his mind, in his conscious mind, he actually calculates if this thing would provide him pleasure or pain. So this is where the pleasure and pain theory came in, where he said that if a person feels that an activity which he does provides him more pleasure than pain, then it is certain that he'll go ahead with that activity. So he also tried explaining the phenomenon of crime using the same philosophy. For example, he said that if he is in such a place where he thinks that he can get away with crime, and he's certain that he'll not get caught, so that will result him in committing the crime. But then actually, this theory, what so this theory again went on for good 2 centuries, and the new age classical thinkers, whom we call the neoclassical school of thought. So what they said was, if a man is a calculative animal, for example, if he calculates that a plus b equals c, and he sees that c getting like proceeding towards c will actually benefit him, then but then that's not the case of crime. Most of the crimes happen under passion. Most of the body offenses, it's only very little percent of the body offenses that are planned. You know? There are a lot of body offenses that just happen in the moment, spur of moment, in the heat of the moment. For example, if you have a tendency of being aggressive, and if something doesn't work in your favor, there is a tendency that you act out in violence, and you may hit someone, or you may use extra force, and that person dies. So this is not a rational thing. This is not something that you have thought of. So the neo school, what they said was, this is one of the reason. So rationality can never be, you can never be a rational criminal. Most of the crime happens in spur of the moment. So this could explain that phenomenon of why do people uh, kill in the heat of the moment. So this is where the theory failed. And so that is in the 18th and 19th century. And after that, in the late 19th century, there was an Italian physicist called Cesar Lombroso. And what Lombroso did was, he was a physician. He was not into sociology or criminology. But then, as part of his duty, what he used to do was, he used to work on the skulls of deceased people. And what he observed was, the people who were criminals in their lives had certain features in their body as well as in their skull. And this led to the development of biological theory of criminal behavior. And he termed his theory as atavistic theory. And he said that criminals were biologically born. So if you can actually differentiate criminals from non-criminals based on their biological distinct features. So he said that asymmetrical facial features, large jaw and large cheekbones, low and stooping foreheads, large ears, long arms, and a receding hairline. So, based on his data from the autopsies that he conducted, he said that few biological features will actually help us determine whether the person is criminal or not. So this was considered a breakthrough because during that time, the classical school of criminology said that society is the reason which actually results someone in being criminal. But then Cesar Lombroso in the late 19th century comes up with a reason, a biological explanation of crime. So this was groundbreaking because in that time nobody thought that biology can be crime can never be internalized. People thought that crime was always a social phenomenon, but then just because he came up with something which was out of the box, people called him the father of criminology. So Cesar Lombroso, based on his atavistic theory in the late 19th century, started was called as the father of criminology. And he said that there are three types of criminals. People who are born criminals, and no matter what condition, what situation they are born in, they will end up being criminals. And there are criminaloids, people who have the tendency of being criminals, but then due to the social structure, they are forced to commit crime. And then there are insane criminals, people who commit crime because of the insanity or the apparent mental health disorders that they. And also, this just because he was someone who had a field in medical history and someone who focused on biology as a reason of crime, he was one of the first criminologists to come up with an individual treatment plan, which in today's terms has a lot of connotations because every human are different, and for example, what might work for one person might not definitely work for another person. Although the type of crime or the type of society or the type of surroundings they are brought up in, just because every human being has a different blueprint, it is not necessary that one shoe fits all works in treatment in criminology. So he was one of the very first individuals to actually prioritize individual treatment plan. So again, so this is when the biological school of thought was really up in flames in the sociological criminological factors. Then in the early 20th century in US, there were a lot of sociologists who based the theory of crime from a geographical point of view. So there was this school of cartography in Boston. They came up with a lot of criminal explanation based on geography that people were brought up in. So that led to a social explanation, a sociological explanation of why people commit crime. And so just because it's 20th century, it is called the modern, it came to be classified under the modern theory of criminology. So one of the very famous school under modern school of criminology was strain theory, Robert Merton's strain theory. So what Robert Merton's strain theory was, which I also touched upon yesterday, is people commit crime because so this is when the thought starts shifting from society and biology to more of a behavioral issue. People started seeing crime as a behavioral issue. So and Robert Merton was one of the first few social thinkers who gave an explanation of uh, frustration being a major reason in committing crime. So again, just because he was based in US, what happened was again the American dream started propagating in the early 20th century, and he said that people from poor background are usually frustrated because of their inability to follow the American dream. And so there is a high tendency that to just to have that societal just to keep up with the societal standards, they will commit crime and actually get away with certain activities and actually use crime in fulfilling the American dream. So, and then there came social disorganization theory, which said that crime is a factor of disorganization in the society. For example, if you live in such institution as in society where there are poor schools, where the family is the group of families that live, the neighborhood that lives with you are already into crime. There is high levels of poverty. There is residential instability. There's a lot of migration happening. There's a lot of diversity among the people that stay there. So, in conclusion, if there is no homogeneity among the society where you stay, that results in, due to the competition among the people, that results in crime. So that came to be known as social disorganization theory. And there was this another breakthrough in the field of social explanation to crime, which was Albert Bandura's social learning theory, which is also followed up till date. And most of the people actually base their theory of criminology telling that crime is a learned behavior. If you see someone, for example, again, in area where poverty is high, where there is instability, where there is no homogeneity among the co-society members, and if you see that somebody is committing crime and he can easily get away with the behavior. And for example, if we again base this argument on Cesar Beccaria's calculative animal, if he's seeing that there is somebody in the society and he is committing crime, and just because of the power that he holds in the society or the money that he has in the society, the position that he has in the society, police doesn't come. He has a hold over the police. He has a hold over the judiciary. He has enough gang with him, and he's actually feared. So people who have a tendency of being deviant learn and subconsciously imbibe that even if I am part of such activity, if I am also able to muster up the courage, if I am also that feared person in the society, I can also get away with crime. So Albert Bandura said that had an explanation of crime being a learned behavior, that people who have an innate tendency of being deviant, if they are put in such conditions where they see and learn that if you commit crime, there is no negative outcome of committing a crime, then people have a tendency of being criminals. So that was social learning theory. And there was social control theory. For example, so all of these theories were built on earlier theories. So what Albert Bandura said was social crime is a learned behavior. But then what social control theory, which was proposed by Travis Hirschi, what he said was, although crime is a learned behavior, but there are certain bonds you have. So that bond can be with your family, that bond can be with your school, that bond can be with some good role models that you have in your life. So the stronger the bonds you have with your family or your society or somebody to look up to, the less the probability of committing a crime. So crime is not only a learned behavior, but it also propagates if you have weak bonds. For example, if you don't have good familiar interpersonal relations, you don't have friends, you don't have good role models to look up to. Your participation and performance in school is poor. If you're a school dropout, if you have a very poor tendency of being part of that society, then you have a high chance of committing crime. So this was social control theory by Travis Hirschi. And then came labeling theory. Again, this is all built on crime being a learned behavior. So what labeling theory said was, uh, for example, if somebody's parent is a criminal, and unfortunately, society has its own way of bullying people who are weak. So, due to the stigma and victimization, a person who is actually a criminal once has always that tag, no matter what good he does. That's the tendency of human being. No matter what good a person does in his life, even if he does one bad thing, that'll be the stigma, that'll be the tag for him. That is how he will be defined forever. no matter how positive or how good or how blessing is he for the society, just one bad thing and all thing crumbles down. So the labeling theory again based its philosophy on that thought and said that if somebody is labeled a criminal, and there is a lot of labeling that happens, if for example, if I am a son of a murderer, and there might be a tendency of me being bullied, people calling me son of a murderer in schools, in society, among the friends, even if it's in joke form, that actually gets in subconsciously in somebody's mind. So it's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you are subjected to that secondary victimization again and again, if you're tagged as again and again as a criminal, if you're labeled again and again as a criminal, you end up being a criminal. So that was labeling theory. And then, so these was all the theories that cropped up in mostly in United States in the 20th century. And then with the advent of left realism, with the advent of Marxist theories, people started explaining the reason of crime as something that was a result of conflict in the society, which again is termed as conflict theory, which was rooted in Marxist ideologies. So, what that theory tried to explain was people commit crime because they have been disadvantaged for a very longer period of time. For example, if you look at the statistics of crime, most of the, for example, if I specifically talk about India, 95% of people who are in prisons are from SC, ST, OBC, Muslim category. So people who are the most vulnerable and marginalized sections of the society. So what the conflict theory or the proponents of conflict theory proposed was, just because they have been disadvantaged for a very longer period of time, just because they have not been able to have that privilege of equality, equity, existence in the society, they commit crime. A lot of class struggle. If you are someone who has faced a lot of struggle based on discrimination against you, based on your caste, class, creed, then there is a tendency that you end up committing crime. And in the modern criminology, the final theory that came was feminist criminology. So so sadly, it's a man's world. Most of the thing have been done by men for men. Most of, for example, all of the criminologists that I just spoke about, or most of the early proponents of sociology, criminology, all the new schools of thought had men playing a lot of roles. But then in the late 20th century, people started coming up with feminist criminology, where people tried explaining the behavior of women who commit crime based on how women were treated or how they were misgendered. So all of those explanations in why there's a tendency of a female committing crime. So that was the modern forms of modern theories of criminology. And later there was a postmodern school of criminological thought that came in, which said that crime is a social construct. So earlier we had biological school of thought, demonological school of thought, which said that crime is a result of sin. Then came the biological school of thought, which classical school of thought, which said that the society shapes up criminal behavior. Then we had biological thought, which said that some certain traits people are born with that result. Then came the sociological explanation of school of thought, which said that certain conditions people, when put in disadvantaged backgrounds, result in crime. But then postmodern criminology, school of criminology, came up with a thought that crime is a social construct, and crime. So what is crime in one society cannot necessarily be a crime in another society. For example, this might sound a bit weird, but then in West Bengal, for example, violence against women is considered a very harsh crime in today's world. But then even today in 2024, there are in certain parts of tribal and the local West Bengal hamlets, there are places where if the husband doesn't beat a wife, she is considered not a good wife. So the thing that is crime in most part of the world is not even a deviant behavior in that part of the world. So that is what the postmodern criminology tried explaining, uh, how certain crime is, how crime is a social construct, and necessarily what is crime in one place doesn't actually uh, translate into crime, it being a crime. For example, mutilation, genital mutilation has a lot of religious connotation to it. For in today's world, it might be a crime to mutilate genital mutilation of kids is considered a crime. It's considered child abuse in a lot of developed societies, but still there are a lot of societies which consider it as part of their customs. For example, if I again dwell in child marriage is 100%. There are UN conventions on the child marriages in India. Also, there are a lot of in the recent times there are very hardcore strictures and laws which uh, doesn't propagate child marriages. But then in few countries and in few cultures, child marriage is a norm. So we need to understand the cultural basis of few societies to understand crime. Just because it's crime in some part of the country doesn't mean that it will be crime in some other part of the country. So that is what the postmodern school of criminology focused on. So, so that's what. So I'll just brief the timeline. So earlier it was demonological, then came the classical school, then came the biological school, then came the modern school of criminology, then came the postmodern school of criminology. And if we look at the latest theories of criminology, if we go back to maybe say 200, 300 years ago, crime has been understood from a environmental point of view. So new age criminologists base their school of thought based on environment, and one of the major theories in them was the routine activity theory by Cohen. So what routine activity theory says is that a crime is a triangle, and we've got three sides in the triangle, and one side is a motivated offender, the second side is a suitable target, and the third is a absence of capable guardian. So what the routine activity theory says is that for a crime to happen, these three things should be there. If any one part of this triangle of these threefold prong is absent, then crime will not happen. So it's either the motivated offender should be present, a victim should be present, and the capable guardianship should be absent. So if you don't have a motivated offender, you'll not have a crime. If you don't have a victim, you don't have a crime. And if you don't have that certain condition, which can be absence of a capable guardian, then crime will not necessarily occur. So that's what the routine activity theory tried explaining. And in eastern part of the world, people have started experimenting with real environment being the reason of crime. For example, in Singapore and Malaysia, people have started coming up with this theory called crime prevention through environmental design. So CPTED. So what they try to say is that crime happens because of certain environmental conditions. For example, most of the theft or most of the mugging, most of the robbery happens at such places where there is, let's say, a lack of street light, or such places where people seldom go. In parks, for example, in northern part of the country, most of the snatching of mobile phones or people showing a gun or showing a knife and robbing you or mugging you happens in such places which are not publicly reachable. For example, parks. For example, places there are where there is no street light, where there are huge trees that, you know, if there are huge trees, then that provides a cover for all of these activities. For example, if you talk about victimless crimes such as abuse of drugs. So most of the abuse of drugs or drug trading happens in such places where people cannot usually reach. So the crime prevention through environmental design school of thought said that if we improve the environment, for example, if we cut the tree, if we don't cut the tree considering the environment, if we trim the tree and make the place easily visualable, if we have sufficient street lights, if we have a lot of police patrolling in such dark places, there is a tendency that crime might reduce. If there's increased surveillance, if the places are developed as urban spaces, there is also always a tendency of people not committing crime. So, and a real environment being a reason of crime. That's what the new age criminologists talk about. And if we talk about the latest theory in 2009, and there was this Indian-based criminologist, Professor Jaishankar. He had a chance of studying crime in the cyberspace, and he came up with a theory called space transition theory, which was trying to, because cyber crimes are the future of crimes. We already, not future, I must say, it's a present phenomenon. A lot of crimes do happen in cyberspaces. So he in 2009 tried explaining uh, the argument or the logic of why people commit crime in the cyberspace, and he came up with 7 postulates for the space transition theory. I'll just read out those 7 postulates. It says that the space transition theory is divided into 7 postulates. uh, First is individuals with repressed criminal behavior in the physical space have propensity to commit crime in the cyberspace. So what that says is that if somebody who has repressed criminal behavior, who maybe because of their timid, shy behavior, or because they have been bullied, or because they don't find the correct deviant association to form groups and commit the crime, if they have really repressed criminal behaviors due to anonymity in the cyberspace, they have a tendency of coming out as criminals in the cyberspace. So necessarily people who, so what the first postulate says is that people who, you can never imagine people who are so not so criminal in the physical space, just because they have a repressed phenomenon of committing crime, they might end up as criminals in the cyberspace. The second postulate says that identity, flexibility, dissociative anonymity, and lack of deterrence in cyberspace provides the offender with the choice to commit cybercrime. That's, again, India, for example, India doesn't have a cyber law. Most of the prosecution is based on IT Act, which was 25 years older. Although the government said that they are working on a new Digital India Act, but then it has not been able to, it is, it's not fruitful. We don't have a law yet, although the government has been working on it for the past 2 years. So till then, we don't have a law. So that actually provides a very big gap in the criminal justice system for cyber criminals. So they can be flexible, they can hide their identity, and just this safety of not getting caught in the physical space, cyberspace, because of the lack of identity, dissociative anonymity, people have a tendency of committing crime. The third postulate says that offender criminal behavior in cyberspace is likely to be imported into physical space, and in turn their behavior in physical space may be exported to cyberspace as well. So people who have a tendency of being criminal in physical space, so their behavior will be translated in the cyberspace, and people who are criminal in the cyberspace may also reflect their criminal behavior in the physical space. So that is one way of analyzing, profiling the cyber criminals. The fourth postulate says that intermittent ventures of offenders into cyberspace and the dynamic spatio-temporal nature of cyberspace provides the chance to escape. See, I can take any identity of any person. For example, in 2024 Jan, in UK, there was a case where a young lady aged 16 years old was in the metaverse. So her avatar in the metaverse was virtually raped by 4 people. Now that became a very big news, because something that we could never imagine. your avatar getting, but then there were arguments that people play a very really violent games, and there you have a tendency of getting killed, and here you were only raped, or you could actually switch off your mobile, or you could actually turn off your device and not actually subject yourself to, because it's not physical, it's virtual. Your meta avatar was getting sexually exploited in a chat room. So what people said was she had an option of getting out of the chat room. She could always turn off her phone, turn off the system, and get out. But then what the lady said was the trauma of virtual rape was as equal as something that people might feel when they're in the physical space. So the ability to escape, and it's really difficult tracking uh, somebody in the cyberspace. Okay, now laws might have evolved into catching criminals because based on the IP address. But then there were times when people could actually use the anonymity principle. There are a lot of cyber developments that the criminals have come up, spoofing, phishing, through which they can always be anonymous. And the fifth postulate states that strangers are likely to unite together in cyberspace to commit crimes in physical space. Associate of physical space are likely to unite to commit crime in cyberspace. Okay, so most of the riots that happen, crimes that are against the sovereignty of a state, it has been proved that most of them were not in physical uh, relations earlier. They met on some cyberspace, some social media, and eventually formed bonds. And just because they had a singular, straight target, they combined together and they ended up committing crimes. So this again proves strangers are likely to unite together in cyberspace to commit crimes in physical space. Their ability to remain anonymous and come together in cyberspace, from WhatsApp groups, from friendship over social media, and commit crime in the physical space has also been proved. The sixth postulate says that persons from close society are more likely to commit crimes in cyberspace than from an open society. So by close society and open society, we mean people who have been uh, disadvantaged for a very longer time. For example, Jamtara is one of the places in Jharkhand where most of the so people from Jamtara are actually involved in a lot of phone scams. So there was literally a documentary explaining how this small village in Jharkhand resulted in a lot of cybercrime. So if we look at the socioeconomic conditions in a poor state like Jharkhand, people are forced to, we cannot stop people from dreaming. So, and if they know that they have necessary means to dupe people, people will again go ahead. So persons from close society are more prone to commit cyberspace crimes. And the final postulate says that the conflict of norms and values of physical space with the norms and values of cyberspace may lead to crime, which is again a conclusion in a nutshell of all the things that people who have access to cybercrime and they believe that they can act it out in the physical space do have a larger hand in committing crimes. So that is in nutshell. I know I ran through all the theories of crime due to the paucity of time, but then that's what in a nutshell is what has been the explanation of crime through the years. In latest parts of criminological understanding, people come up with mixed method of criminological explanation, where the new age criminologists in the 21st century say that crime is a result of a lot of mixed factors. So society can be a reason, behavior can be a reason, personal thing can be a reason, the tendency to commit crimes in cyber world can be a reason. So, so that's what the new age criminologists come up with. So we've got some time. So what I'll do is I have a case study where my team, when I work, we used to work in the prison, we involved, and I'll just brief the whole case, and at the end I'll try and explain what part of criminological theory explains his criminal behavior. So the case study is of a person who had significant history of being a child in conflict with law. So before he turned 18, he had sufficient history of being in a juvenile setting. If I talk about his family, he had a father, a mother. He was the eldest son, and he had a younger brother. And he had not so cordial relationship with his parents, but he was very friendly with his younger brother. And he used to discuss all of his problems with his younger brother. And he was observed to be quite passive and non-aggressive, and he had a positive command over himself, but he had poor impulses. And just because he was a part of lot of deviant activities, the place where he used to live were surrounded by a lot of deviant people. From young age, he got into the habit of shooting up drugs. So from age 14, he was abusing substances. And the crime that he committed was he actually, with his friend, went to a police petrol bunk with the aim of looting that petrol bunk. So he had just his friend had a gun. He shot twice in the petrol bunk, but then unfortunately, this crime happened in 2019. And unfortunately, the place where he committed the crime was at night, and most of the transactions that happened in the petrol pump were through online medium, and there was no hard cash with the person. So the robbery failed, but just because there was CCTV cameras, he was caught in the CCTV camera, and that led to the police investigation and him being caught. Interestingly, he was pursuing his BSc in chemistry from IGNU, from an open school, and he also had completed his digital marketing courses. So he was very when I met him in prison, he also used to participate in a lot of activities that we used to conduct for all the prisoners. His father was unemployed, and he said that most of the problems in his life was because his father was unemployed, and maybe he had big dreams. He had maybe he was just because he was he just because he has a tendency towards getting educated meant that he maybe had some friends in school who used to boast about the things that they used to do with money, and just because he didn't have good um, socio-economic conditions in the home. Father is unemployed, mother does the work, most of the work. And maybe that frustration of not having enough money to spend the younger ages in joyfully spend them thriftily. Maybe that inability to do that really frustrated him for a longer period of time. And he also had financial dependency, meaning he could not actually manage his finances very well. If he had 1,000 rupees today, he would actually spend all of those 1,000 rupees today and actually maybe steal for tomorrow. So there was no tomorrow for him. Everything was today and today's enjoyment for him. And we did some psychological tests on him, and heavy drug habits, poor relation with family, heavy deviant association, mental health state examination was poor. He was very sexually deviant, and there was a risk of recidivism. That means there was a tendency of him being again going into crime. We again did some more psychological tests, and we found that heavy neuroticism was present and high social desirability was present. There was this, then we have a copy of FIR, and then we did, all right, high loyalty levels are also observed. So this was one of the reasons why he formed, he was considered very loyal among his gang members. That is also something that's a violence risk assessment. So we also measured his ability to be violent in certain situations, and his risk of violence was moderate to high. So these are all scientifically measured psychological tools. I'm just trying to build a portrayal of what this person is. And all right, so this is what his brief sketch is, and I would like to explain his uh, criminal behavior through strain theory, which was one of the proponent theories of by Robert Merton, which we also discussed yesterday, the American dream. So there were three. So after all the scientific measurements, we came up with three major reasons of him committing crime, which was failure to achieve a valued goal. So that explains low monetary success. He also had a lot of rejection. He didn't have a satisfactory love life. There were loss of positively valued stimulus. He didn't have good relationship with his family. He didn't have anybody to look up to. He didn't have good role models in his family, and heavy presentation of negatively valued stimuli. He was also physically abused. Physically abuse is very common among poor families. He was always hit by his father. So the only positive thing in his, so there was a lot of out of home presence. He used to run away from home. He used to not come to home. He used to come to home very late at night, not talk to his father for a longer period of time. And these three things, coupled with a deviant association and prolonged drug abuse, resulted in. So there can be a lot of other explanations, other theories which can, but then his behavior actually fitted well into the prospects of general strain theory. So a failure to achieve a valued goal, a loss of positively valued stimuli, presentation of negatively valued stimuli coupled with deviant association and prolonged drug abuse resulted him in being a criminal. So what? So this again, this case study didn't end well. So what happened was he spent a good 1.3 years inside the prison. And what happened was, just because, so there is a tendency, if you are a criminal and if you commit, if you have a history of committing offenses, and if you are in the what is called the roll call of the police, so if any crime happens in that locality, these people are picked up first. So it was with very difficulty for so for all the 1.3 years he was with us inside the prison, we really motivated him. There were a lot of psychoanalytical, psychotherapeutic sessions we made him part of. There were a lot of positive stimuli we tried getting in him. We tried raising his confidence. We made him participate in a lot of the activities inside the prison school. We made him peer supporter, peer educator. So he was also educating the other prisoners. He also continued with his education while being in prison. But then, unfortunately, while he got out, he was some murder happened in his locality, and he and his friend who actually committed this shooting in petrol pump were again caught up by the. And just because it was some gang member in the society that was killed, he was subjected to third degree torture. There was unfortunately some heavy forms of torture that police subjected him to get out some information. But then he was totally, so we could even, although it was not recorded that he had completely gotten out of the issue of drugs, because he even used to shoot up drugs while inside the prison. That was something that we wanted to work while he got out, but then that could never materialize, because this one incident actually threw water on our whole 1 year preparation. And unfortunately, he is a hardcore criminal now. So it's been 4 years that we've been in touch with him, and unfortunately, I've been in touch with him for all these 4 years, and things have only worsened from there. So I'll just share the notes of today's lecture over WhatsApp for you to refer. And that, again, with the paucity of time, I'd like to conclude. Shall we close, please? If you've got any questions, you can always reach out to me. You have my number in WhatsApp. We need people. I think Swapnil is away. I'll only close the session. There was a psychological theory that stated that characteristic of person can be identified structure of skull. Oh, I don't. Well, I'm not quite. structure of skull. That's not psychological theory. That's biological theory. The theory of atavism by Cesar Lombroso. But then again, what he did was, all of the uh, skulls that he actually studied on were from African Americans. So that again is a very highly unethical thing to do. Harish's doubt. Psychology doesn't actually. Psychology is a study of behaviors. It doesn't necessarily translate into anthropological school of thought. All right, I think I'll only conclude. It was a really nice having you guys for the whole 2 days, and I hope that we keep meeting and make yourself proud, guys. Any question you can ask, otherwise we can quit this session.
Sir, I think there is some question in the chat box.
I already. Yeah, that's what Harish's question. Huh? Skull में it was Cesar Lombroso in the late 19th century, the Italian physicist who worked on structure of skull. That is also well shown in Django Unchained movie, where Candy, Mr. Candy, he also explains the behavior of deviancy by cracking a skull. There's a lot of reference in movies also. All right, Swapnil, so we'll close the session. All right, guys. Good night. We'll see you soon.
So I think there are no more questions. We would end the session here. Thank you so much all for attending. Have a great evening ahead.